Welcome to another episode of the Community Podcast, a conversational podcast exploring the stories, insights, and strategies behind learning-centered communities. Our mission is to inspire listeners by highlighting individuals who are shaping the future of how people come together to learn, grow, and thrive. I am thrilled today to welcome Pixie Cigar, a systems thinker and ecosystem builder who works at the intersection of community, learning, and large-scale human connection. Pixie's work focuses on designing human-centered systems that translate strategy into real participation and outcomes, particularly in environments where collaboration, trust, and ownership are challenging to sustain. With over a decade of experience across tech, education, and social impact, Pixie has led initiatives that mobilize thousands of people across geographies, from scaling seller ecosystems at Lazada to building global alumni networks at Teach for All, and her work has spanned 60 countries and over 100,000 educators. At the core of Pixie's work is a central question. How do we design systems that don't just exist, but actually work meaningfully for real people? Pixie, it's awesome to have you on the podcast.
Hi, Farhan. I'm doing great. It's beautiful weather. Really excited about having a conversation today about my favorite topic.
We've had a few conversations to date, but I'm really excited to have you dive into your background, your vision, and your philosophy on successful community building. Let's get started with your background, Pixie. When we first chatted, I was kind of wowed by all the different countries that you've lived in. We kind of found out that we both know exactly where I am currently located, just south of Istanbul. So tell us a little bit more about what you described to me as you call yourself a third culture kid. Maybe that's a good starting point.
Yeah, I love that. I just remember our conversation and thought, how is it possible that I'll meet somebody somewhere across the world, being from the same background as my husband, and know the same town of where I used to live back in Turkey? And that was super interesting. I think for me, I call myself a third culture kid. This is essentially somebody who lives outside of where their either birthplace or passport is. So my passport I have is Hungarian, but to me, it's just a passport. I grew up mostly in Asia. Before I was 18 years old, I moved across 5 countries, 7 cities, and 20 times. So life was I never call myself well traveled because it was never an intentional decision of I'm going to travel the world and explore it. It was out of necessity. It was my parents are going, so I need to go and I need to figure out how to integrate into this place. And being the eldest daughter and the eldest of three and to immigrant parents, it was very much on how can I get our life set up when my parents are busy bringing in money and building a home for us. But that really shaped who I am as a person, and it changed my views on the world and what this global world even means, or what countries and passports even mean.
What was the most significant learning? Was there a time in your background when you thought to yourself, wow, I'm the trailblazer for my siblings? If I don't get this right, I'm not really setting themselves up for success, or maybe I have to be that role model so that they find their home more easily as a third culture kid.
Tricky. I never thought of myself as a trailblazer. I just thought of me just living life. Like, this is the situation and we need to figure it out. And it's always better to do it with a smile than be upset about it. I think for my sisters, beyond kind of my role in my family and the circumstances we were in, I always had a lot of curiosity and asking why. Why do people do this? Why is the markets in this neighborhood during this time of day? And why are they closed for 3 hours randomly midday? Why do people, if you want to find a good apartment somewhere, you need to ask around the locals and don't go to agents in the city? But in this other country, you need to go to an agent or else you can't trust anything else. And I think life was very much about asking why, and that was already who I was. And I was very privileged to be in the circumstance that these whys directly meant life. Because I think sometimes when we're growing up, when you ask a lot of whys, your environment may say it doesn't matter. Don't ask these questions. But to me, every why directly impacted my life and the things around me.
This idea of kind of curiosity being the kernel that led to self discovery, or in many instances, kind of planted the seed for building something that becomes a longer term passion is a common thread for many of the guests that I've brought onto this podcast. As you navigated all these different communities, as maybe the outsider, as somebody who hadn't grown up there or who hadn't been embedded in that culture for as long as everybody else was, were there certain things beyond your curiosity that really enabled you to maintain that resilience, maintain that positive outlook?
I think I come in to these communities as the obvious outsider. Like, I don't look anything like them, speak a different language. Though I was lucky because in my case, I didn't have the same immigrant experience as a Asian or a Africa or Middle Easterner going to a Western country. I went as a, well, half white person into Asia. So I had a very, very different experience. I came in with a presumed privilegedness, which was really weird because that wasn't the reality of my family. So there was this weird way of people thinking that you don't belong because you're too good for us, which was never the case. There was this mission in a way of how am I going to make sure people understand that we're on the same playing field, but how can I incorporate in the way of breaking down classes too? Because that was also a really tricky thing. And what benefited me, like what you were asking, was hey, I go in here, how can I build value from this? And that value could be knowing a culture more, knowing a new language. I'm very much someone, if I know one word of a language, you rest be sure I will use it as many times as possible within the sentence because this is where you build connection, where people see that no, you're not just coming from a top down. Okay, I'm coming here as a foreigner or quote unquote expat, even though no, we're immigrants, right? We're immigrants. But people, I always want to make sure that people see that I'm coming here because I want to be part of them and I'm not telling them how they should act because I'm from somewhere else.
I think that's one of the things that as I sit in Turkey, in the small town of Çiftlikköy that we both know, it's what has kept me basically going for as long as I spend time here, right? I go out, I meet my neighbors, I meet the people that work in the grocery stores nearby. I get on the little minibuses that take me to the center of town. Every interaction at its core needs to be a human interaction. We all come from various backgrounds. We all have certain preconceived notions about our place in the world and how we grew up, and those inform our outlooks. But when you take an empathetic approach to start, I'll give you a good example, Pixie, right? So I went and got simit, the little Turkish sesame bagel that maybe some listeners know about. There's a favorite simit spot. My favorite simit spot, I should say, is down the street from, it's like a 5 minute bike ride. And I went there yesterday for the first time, and the simit guy knows me very well, but this time he straight up wanted to ask me where I'm from, which is a common question in Turkey because I also don't look anything like the people here, right? So I always struggle. I'm like, do I tell this person where I'm from? Do I tell them what my passport is? Do I tell them where I was born? Because those are all three different answers, right? And the guy, I just said, oh, I'm from Bangladesh. It's the easiest answer, right? And he said, Bangladesh, wow, that's a great country. Is that India? And I'm like, well, you're in the neighborhood. It's right next to India, you know. I appreciated the fact that they're curious. I appreciated the fact that they want to know. I can't fault somebody for not knowing something. I see that as an opportunity for me to teach and for me to share and for me to elevate their understanding, even if it's just a small little tidbit of information that they didn't have, right? So the more we are willing to share, the more we are willing to put ourselves in a little bit of an inconvenience, right? Like, hey man, I'm here to buy a bagel. I don't really want to chat, right? I could take a very, you know, ruthless outlook on this kind of issue as well, but I saw that as an opportunity to engage, to genuinely build connection. Now, when I see him again, I'm probably going to go there later today, he's going to recognize me. I'll have built a connection, right? And that foundational experience, that short exchange at a very human level, set us up for something that can really grow into something more, just more special, you know? I'm not saying this guy's going to be my best friend, but it's a human interaction, and I think we're losing out on the serendipity and the beauty of those simple moments of connection.
No, 100%. And I think it's funny. I feel throughout my life, I've been constantly asked that question, where are you from? Because I've never ever lived in the country that I am from or that I look like I'm from. And I have actually had a different answer each time. I tailor my answers depending on the person and understanding what would build a connection with them the fastest. So, for example, when I'm in Turkey, I always say I'm from Malaysia. Or if I have a sense like, okay, this person may be mixed, I always say I'm from Hungary, also because I know how to say Hungary in Turkish. So that also helps. Or if I meet a Asian, I will also, depending on the cases, I'll have a different answer. And this very much comes from the fact that people are genuinely curious because when somebody asks you where they're from, I really believe that they're also trying to find a common point. They're trying to see, okay, we're all human, but what do you bring? What is your culture? I really like whenever I do something, especially when I'm in a mixed cultural environment, which is my life, and I do something, I will always mention, oh, in my culture, this is what we do these things. This is the meaning behind it. In Islam, there's this huge concept of adab, right? What's the politeness? What's etiquette there? And I think the biggest etiquette as humans is helping another person build fondness to you in an authentic way and see here's the dots that connect us as people. And this invites people to want to feel empathy because obviously, if you ask me about some random country in the world, I'm not going to know the culture. Why should I expect everyone else to know it, right? We're all from very different cultural contexts, education level, or just interest point. So I always try to find that interest point because people want to know and they want to be part of it. And that is really how you end up what I call breaking into a community, which I always see is your first step. Before you build a community, you need to break into it first.
That's a perfect segue to the next question I had for you, Pixie, which is, we know we're talking about our very diverse backgrounds and the ways that we've had to kind of creatively, in a very human-centered way, navigate these differences. What led you personally to kind of embrace community building as a career? Or maybe it wasn't a career to start, but you kind of naturally gravitated towards this, becoming a builder of community. How did that happen?
If you asked me about 15 years ago, I wouldn't even know what community building meant, but I was actively doing that. I started out not knowing what I wanted to do in my life and not having this purpose, and that really bothered me. I felt like I needed a why and to charge towards it. For context, I was in military management style schooling where you were very much brought up with here's the mission, head towards it all you can, and I can do that, but you need to give me a direction. So my method was I'm going to start saying yes to every single thing possible. Started volunteering, working with minority groups in China, went to Malaysia, helping out youth diplomacy groups, unemployment, orphanages, anything that says yes. Anytime someone says, oh, I need help in an event or I need an MC, I would just say yes, even though I had no clue how to do that. And I had extreme stage fright when I was in my 20s, like pass out level. But my mission was, okay, how I'm going to, I know humans is what nurtures me, being around people and connecting with people. And my biggest life skill I've learned by moving around the world was building community, though I didn't know this what it was. And it was actually probably around 2017 when the startup scene started growing in Malaysia and I started doing startup events and all that. And then I hear the term community builder. That was a spark moment. I always saw myself as a jack of all trades, master of none until I heard this term. I'm like, no, I'm the master of community. And to do community is you need to be able to do a bit of everything because community is all walks of life. It's that person or that way of connecting all these really amazing things into one with a shared purpose. And that's how I got into that. And I never went back. Sometimes I say I've been in this for 10 years, sometimes I say 12 years. I think when I say 10 years, it's more of when I knew what I was doing.
I can 100% agree with you and sympathize with that because I think a lot of community builders, folks that I've had on the show, others that I've spoken to, in the most random and fun moments, we all kind of reflect on this idea that we kind of fell into it. It was something we enjoyed. It was something that we either our lived experiences prepared us for, or we eventually just did it enough times, right? And I think the diversity of the experiences, like you being able to say yes to so many different things, even though you say that you had stage fright, you were also fearless, right? You were willing to get yourself into all these different positions. So there's a paradox there where you had to be comfortable with being uncomfortable enough times where maybe it became second nature.
100%. I think that's a big skill, the soft skill one has to have when you're doing our kind of work. You need to be thick face. You need to think, I have this really cool idea. It may work or it may hilariously fail, and you need to look past that and think, no, I'm still going to go ahead and do it. That was my method for the longest time. Now, obviously, mature, now there's data, now there's other things, but I think there's this innate gut instinct that, in a way, quote unquote, AI cannot replace. AI could create this data and shows that, hey, here are all of the things that says that this idea could work for a community. There's an X% of probability of it succeeding. But sometimes, especially as somebody who has had that lived experience, have spoken to those they're serving with lived experience, there is that gut feeling. There is that deep down knowing, you know what? This direction is right. I may not know the exact pathway to get there, but this is a good direction. I need to try it out, even though it may or may not work.
Yeah, there's the comfort level with being uncomfortable. That's huge. The idea that you want to fail fast. If you do fail, that's totally okay. Let's fail fast. Let's learn. Let's iterate the approach. And hey, we learned a lesson as a result of this, right? We were able to get further ahead as opposed to if we had never tried to begin with, kind of thing, right? So those kind of
100%.
those systematic, types of frameworks that I think a lot of other industries use, the agile framework when it comes to software development, many other types of outlooks on how to get work done and how to collaboratively build something, I think also apply to community in many ways. One of the things I would love to ask you, Pixie, is as you matured in your understanding of how community comes together, what are some of the systems that you began to rely on? We're thinking about community building as an organic endeavor. What are some of those ways that you, over the course of your career, you found to be very helpful?
So this really depends on the type of community that one is building. My priority has always been professional networks. So whether it be legal tech communities, e-commerce seller communities, educator communities, these are always spaces where people had a very specific career goal, but an underlying personal love, because that personal love is the thing that keeps you joining, right? That incentivizes you. The systems that I've built was always around how can each interaction then trickle down or trickle up to the bigger picture of things. So let's use Alibaba, for example, right? So we have a community for these e-commerce sellers. Yeah, they come together, they share tips on how to grow, but is that enough? What does that mean? What is the bigger picture here, right? If our platform is not serving and making sure it's designed around their needs, then they can talk to the end of time and it's not really making any change. So the first layer of systems that we see as from our users, depending on your community, our users, what does the insights and what is the product we're using to serve these users? This can be a program or product, it doesn't matter. And how can we make sure that each interaction, whether it be an event, a post, what does this mean to other things that is serving them? What I mean fundamentally is that when you have a company and you have a community there, this community cannot be detached from how the business operates. It has to be interconnected with how we launch products, how we design products, what kind of speakers do we invite to programs. They all matter. It cannot be an afterthought or it cannot be siloed out. So second is creating systems that just makes it easier for us to identify who are our members. In the past, I very much had this, okay, just come in, join the community. It's easy, come in. No. I learned it the hard way that this is not a good idea. And I think sometimes the way how I would evaluate the quality of a community is what is the quote unquote barrier to entry? What tells somebody that this is for me and not for the other person? And I always say that a community for everyone is a community for no one. So building up the system and making it clear to not just the members, but the community team and the company of who is it for and how do we approve, how do we define membership is so incredibly important. And sometimes that's the boring work that we tend to not put enough emphasis. And this also leads to how are we collecting the data? What platforms are we putting it in? How is it talking to everything else, all the other systems? And then the third one I would say is relating to feedback. Feedback is extremely important. We always ask questions like, did you like it? But is that enough? Sometimes someone will say that, oh, I really enjoy being part of this community. And let's say it's a product community. And the goal of the product community was to improve their performance on this platform. They say they love it, but then we look at the back end and see this user is not performing. They're actually not succeeding on this platform. So is this community actually serving them? It may give them the feel good, but it's not actually helping them why they were there in the first place. So really looking at the data and understanding the bigger picture and not just what people are saying, but their real reality are the systems. So I would say these are the priority 3 systems that I generally when I go into a community, the first things I'm thinking about.
A very comprehensive overview, Pixie, and I think a lot of our listeners will appreciate the fact that you need this holistic framework that integrates community with the business needs and outcomes and goals as early as possible. And it needs to be something that is periodically revisited. It needs to be something that multiple stakeholders within the organization need to be a part of that conversation. The marketing team, the customer success team, let's say, other, community managers, of course, people that are doing the work of community day to day, they all have to have the connections between them, the kind of interdepartmental or cross-departmental collaboration between them to really be able to understand that what is working and what's not working. When it comes to data, Pixie, I'm curious because I'm reading a lot about how you want to measure the right things, right? Whenever you're running any kind of endeavor, you look for signals, you look for numbers to be able to qualify whether you're heading in the right direction, what needs to be course corrected, etc. A lot of times in the community context, we see engagement metrics as maybe being the most important, kind of maybe the gold standard. How many messages are people sending? How many times are individuals being tagged? How many people are attending synchronous sessions? Things like that. So engagement kind of is its own category, but I'm curious, what are some of the data points that you personally find to be very revealing as kind of a litmus test of whether a community is working or not working? I know it can depend on the circumstance and on the business need, so there may not be a one-size-fits-all type of answer, but what are some of the go-to data points that you look to?
I would say the go-to that I care about are one, are they succeeding? And this again depends on the business. So if this is a community for, let's say, a leadership program, are they succeeding for the reason why they signed up for this leadership program? Or if they're an e-commerce marketplace seller, are their sales growing? Or if let's say they're in a football community, are they able to gain the value what this community talks about? So that's the first thing. Are we serving them in the way that they came here for? Second would be, are they wanting to not really engage, but are they revisiting? I think, but also revisit rate, I would say, is a really tricky one to go down. Because think about this, right? We have a community and there's this platform that we're using to serve them. If they could get the answer in their first visit, us caring about how many times they come back in is not actually the best way to measure success. Because it either means one, the first time didn't help them, or two, they're not actually looking, or they want to show up, but not in the way that we think. And then we have to rethink, like, how are we designing the whole experience around it? So it's first one is success metrics on the platform, like why are they there, are they achieving that? The second would be understanding their patterns of behavior, and that will help me analyze what are we doing right and doing wrong. And then the third one, it is going to be that personal feedback, is what people are saying if they say they love A, B, and C, and I know that as a company, we've been prioritizing pushing D for a very long time, and no one is talking about the good or bad, that's a red flag. That's a signal that I need to look at. Because if we're putting 80% of our energy on this project and no one talks about the good or bad, there needs to be something done there. So I would say these are three, but there are a lot of other things that you can look at. I think at the end of the day, you need to put yourself in the experience of the user while thinking about what the company actually wants. We could the user could have 200 wishes, but that's not our job. And a user doesn't actually expect to have all these 200 wishes granted on this place. So how can we make sure that we're aligning for their initial why of their there? We could explore on expanding it. So let's say have other products in the past, or even suggest them to be part of different type of communities too that outside of us. But at the end of the day, it's about, are they getting the value in the right way?
Yeah, I think the value component of it needs to be revisited too. I keep going back to this idea of keeping a pulse on the community because it's so crucial to maintain that connection and ensure that people are remaining active members of the community, how people build that long-term relationship, right? So I'm curious, Pixie, when you think about the idea of community in the context of we talked about community in the context of systems and in the context of companies. Have you found in your experience misconceptions about community that should be dispelled? Or if there's one top misconception that comes to mind for you, what would that be?
This is probably a bit more on the professional networks, but it could work in other places too. I would say the top misconception is that more activities will make the community more engaged. And it's a mixture of more activities or more free value. We are so consumed as individuals with so much content. Every single time we turn on your phone, there is something that you can be scrolling through. We're receiving so much. And sometimes at the beginning, we can get a bit trigger happy as communities or organizations that we say provide value, give value, value, value. Because every time we turn on any kind of business, YouTube, or even today, our conversation, I keep talking about value. But sometimes we need to know that we don't have to serve every single thing. We need to, cutting down actually makes it way more easier for the users. Less things. Yes, there are some people that are not going to be able to access everything. Because if, let's say, you do one event a month, that means, okay, maybe other people can't attend because of different hours. Then you need to think for your primary users that you really want to engage, how can you serve this group? You are not going to be able to serve 100% of them, and that is okay. But you need to think what are other ways that they can receive this value without overwhelming them? Because sometimes we go onto these really amazing platforms and there are 5 events per week. There is help centers. There's a YouTube channel with like 300 videos. There's a podcast. And we send out newsletters and giving them all of these links. And the reality is they end up not looking at the newsletter anymore because they know every single time they receive a newsletter is 10, 20 different offerings per week and they feel overwhelmed. So misconception, don't want to do more.
Yeah,
People don't actually need more things.
I think less is more, and I think it's you want to meet people where they are, right? I can reflect on newsletters. I used to subscribe to so many. At the beginning of this year, it was kind of like a pseudo New Year's resolution. I told myself I can't subscribe to these because if they reach my inbox, I'm compelled. I've been doing this for more than a decade now. I do inbox zero, which a lot of people probably think I'm crazy, but I don't know. There's enough inbox zero people out there.
I
So
want to be you when I grow up one day.
I love
Maybe in 30 years I could do that.
I ascribe very strongly to the inbox zero, less is more, lower my mental cholesterol. I need to focus on just a few things at a time. But then I'm horrible about my tabs when I'm looking at a browser. There's like 70 tabs open
We don't
across.
talk about the tabs.
That's a taboo topic. We don't want to go down that road, right?
Yeah, that's inappropriate.
But we compromise on certain things, but then other things we don't. There is absolutely no doubt. I don't think anybody can argue that we are all mentally flooded with content. We're flooded with information. So as community builders, you want to focus on the right things. You want to meet your community members where they are and give them value. Don't overwhelm them. see what sticks, and try to condense that information, the most valuable things that will help your community members, give it to them in the way that'll resonate the best with them. And there's going to be some iteration involved, and some people I'm sure will leave, which is okay, right? But the exclusionary element of it too, we're not here to serve everybody, okay? It's a community for a reason. There are certain norms, there are certain ways that we do things. It works for the vast majority of us. We're trying to improve and make it even better. We welcome you to be a part of that experience, but by no means are we promising that we have it all figured out or that it's going to be perfect, right? So I think it's also very important to lead with
100%.
that.
You mentioned that members will leave. Sometimes we see this as a negative thing. I think there's a lot of reason to celebrate somebody leaving in a way. Like I mentioned, you're at one point you're going to lose value from a community. There's this very famous global community called AZEC, and it's really amazing amongst university students if they want to kind of build on their diplomacy skills and they want to connect with people, or model United Nations. You go into this during university, brings a lot of value. When you're 35 years old, there's no business being part of this anymore. You've gained your value. It doesn't mean that when you're 21 years old, this wasn't immense value and it was super good for you. I think, and this is something I wanted to actually start practicing, I was just not in the right community for it, is to have this concept of a celebration when a member is leaving. And kind of this graduation moment of like, I'm so glad you found the value and you have developed as amazing, let's say, accountant, and you think that now it's ready for something else. And I want to see communities celebrating members leaving. Obviously, if it's because they hate the place and they had horrible experiences, we need to fix that. But I want every member to leave with that sense of, wow, this was amazing and I'm ready for the next thing.
I could not agree more. And actually, I'm an AZEC alum myself. It was what brought me to Turkey in the first place 15 years ago. So
I love that.
crazy way to go back to make a full circle comparison or, reflection. But I could not agree more, right? We must celebrate the learnings and we must celebrate the progress and how community members are fundamentally going through a community in their own journey, in their own stage of development and their personal goals that they're looking to achieve and the value that they seek for themselves. Let's talk a little bit about AI, Pixie, because I know everybody's talking about it, so we have to. But we touched on it a little bit earlier. The human connection, the serendipity of being able to, being a third culture kid, being able to build these networks very organically and then systematize it in the ways that you have. I think you bring a really interesting perspective into how technology will continue to inform how communities are shaped and built and sustained. So what's your take on AI? What are you most excited about?
I think most of my Fridays are spent watching AI videos while I'm cooking of updates. I spend a lot of time in understanding different platforms, how to work with it. Because when it came out, it was very much for me that this is exactly what we need as community builders. But the reality is, when you're scaling communities and you're going global and you're getting more technical and more grand, you cannot be the jack of all trades. You kind of need to be the master of all trades. But that's not our job. It's not our job to be that master of all trades. So what I see the value of AI is lifting out those things that we actually have to get it done really, really well, but we don't have our brains are not meant to be spending our time on this. So using AI to scale, because let's be real, good vibes, they don't scale. We need to make sure that as a community builder, we can bring people together, connect the dots, and see the bigger picture. Then we can systemize it and say, okay, building up workflows to make sure that the whole membership journey is seamless. Looking at data in ways that maybe we're not all technical enough, or we don't have the big enough team to be able to analyze the data to that extent, and utilizing AI for it. At the end of the day, AI is there to make our humanness even more human and valuable. I remember when I was working at Alibaba, a lot of my time was setting up, looking at Excel sheets, dashboards, going through like very technical things, which I love doing. But at sometimes I could have been spending maybe at least 40% of my time on relationship building in the company, talking to more members. That would have been more value of my time. If I go back in 2018, I'd probably be using AI with what the tools that we have today. And I think any kind of professional out there needs to understand what are their unique human skills that they need to actually get better at while utilizing AI to do the other non-humany things, but is necessary to grow and scale.
I see that trend come up time and time again, Pixie. So I really appreciate you reinforcing it because I think that is the fundamental dichotomy that we are all battling right now. I think as individual contributors, as people leaders, as individuals that are just interacting with technology in our daily lives, we need to have some AI literacy. And ideally, the more we have, the better, because then we understand how these technologies are being built, how they're influencing us, how we can leverage them to be able to have more success in our daily lives and in our professional lives, but to a certain degree, right? AI is not the solution for everything. We can't just implement it. We can't just put it in as a cure-all for whatever we're trying to solve. Human beings, we are fundamentally endowed with skills, insights, brains, conscience, psychologies that robots will never be able to have, right? That something that's ingesting data and giving something out as an output, basically, they're not going to be able to replicate what we bring to the table. So leave the robots to do what the robots do best. They can save our time, to your point, so we can focus more on the human side of the equation that they'll never be able to do, right?
100%. And also, stop using AI as a Google search, please.
What's the reason for that,
Use it
Pixie?
in
Yeah.
use it intentionally. I
Yeah.
think I see a lot of people how they use AI. They just ask, "Oh, can you create this Instagram post for me?" I'm like, "What are you doing?" Because let's be real, we are using energy and a lot of resources to generate these is there. Like this is a real risk. But we also know that there is real value. So we need to know that every single time we're utilizing AI, how intentional are we with it? Because it's using energy and a lot of really amazing people put together something not for you to just Google, ask it like a Google search.
100%.
Spend time, go through the technical videos, spend a weekend, 2 weeks on it. It will give you way more value than just casually using it as a Google search.
Yeah. And I think part of that too is leverage these tools. Like when you need to use them for something that is going to move the needle on whatever you're working on, be thoughtful about it. Learn how to use it as a
Yeah.
tool, right? So that you are able to actually execute it in the most proper way possible and get the most value from it. But don't leverage it as your shortcut for everything and anything, right?
No,
Uh,
it's not.
and that's, I think, to the detriment of our own development as individuals and as people who build community too, because there's no shortcut to the hard work that
No,
needs to get done. You can't build a connection with
100% no.
somebody the same way that you would interact with an AI engine, right? So very, very interesting perspective there. So Pixie, as we wrap up, I'd love to have you share a bit more about what you are most excited about in your personal journey. I know you're in London right now, so it's a new city, relatively new city, I should say, because you're coming up to your 1 year mark in that town. But what are you most excited about personally, professionally? And then how can people find out more about what you do and follow your work?
Thing I'm most excited about on a personal level is exploring the different kind of communities in London, the activities. Recently just joined a Mahjong community to also understanding the diaspora here. London is such a unique space in the world, and I want to take my time in the next few years that I'm here to understand why do the people come here, who are these groups, and every neighborhood there's like really unique cultural things to learn about them. So that's really exciting. And on the personal side, I'm starting a new role, also doing some consulting too. My biggest focus is how can we create access, and whether this access is to education, to opportunities. Access has always been my main root of why I do the work that I do. And if anyone would like to connect, find me on LinkedIn, Pixie Cigar. Yes, it is a real name. It's in my passport. I've gotten asked about that. And yeah, I'd love to just keep building my network and meeting amazing human beings doing really cool things.
I'm going to put all of the links in the show notes. I hope we get a chance to meet later this month when I'm in London. And it's been such a fantastic conversation, Pixie. I'm sure this was not our first conversation, but we have many more to come. And I really look forward to staying in touch. And I'm sure our listeners are going to reach out to you.
Love that. Yeah, really excited. Had so much fun today, Farhan, and really appreciate you creating the space for us to talk community.
Of course, it's my pleasure.